you believe that we are the only ones who have ever lived in this world? Because for a long time, we've only been taught one thing about the origin of civilization. According to standard history, for almost 200,000 years, humans were just simple hunter-gatherers, moving from place to place, hunting, living day by day, without big cities, without advanced technology, and without organized civilization. Then suddenly, everything changed. Around 10,000 BCE, it was like a switch was flipped all over the world. And after this is when agriculture supposedly began. This is where the first cities were built. This is where writing, engineering, and large stone monuments that can be seen in different parts of the earth emerged. This is what mainstream archaeology calls the beginning of civilization. But what if our understanding is wrong? What if this isn't really the beginning? What if it's actually humanity's second chance? What if the first civilizations we know are not really the first civilizations? What if they are just survivors rebuilding the world after an even older civilization was wiped out? A civilization so ancient and so destroyed that almost no clear evidence remains. And as time passed, it was gradually buried by soil, mud, rocks, and layers of sediment that are only now being uncovered. This is what modern science understands. In fact, that catastrophe has a name, and scientists call it the Younger Dryas. And when you understand what really happened around 12,800 years ago, you'll start to question whether the entire timeline of human history is actually correct. But before we talk about the catastrophe itself, we first need to look at what might have existed before it happened. But before we start, don't forget to like this video. It means a lot to us content creators. Thank you very much, and now let's get started. According to traditional archaeology, people before 10,000 BCE were said to be simple. They say there were no permanent cities, no advanced engineering, and no large organized societies. They say humanity was just nomadic back then, separated from each other, living simple lives. And for a long time, it seemed like this was supported by evidence because nothing else had really been found. But as modern science digs deeper, there are things that slowly start to challenge the old beliefs. One of the biggest questions is this: if modern humans have existed for a long time, why does it seem like progress was so slow for such a long period? According to genetic studies, anatomically modern humans have been on Earth for at least 300,000 years. This means that humans already had modern brains even back then. They had the ability to think, create systems, organize, and innovate. In fact, their brains were almost the same as ours today. So the question is, what happened during the nearly 290,000 years before civilization supposedly began? Because think about this. From simple tools to smartphones, the internet, and space technology, humanity only spent about 12,000 years to get here. But before that, supposedly, almost nothing happened for a very long time. No permanent cities, no organized knowledge systems, no large structures. It was just wandering around and waiting for thousands of years. For many researchers, there seems to be something wrong with that story. And this is where the more surprising possibility begins to emerge. What if something happened that literally reset civilization? In 2007, a group of 26 researchers from 9 different countries and institutions released a controversial but very significant study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They discovered something unusual: a thin but dark layer of sediment that appears in different parts of the world. Not just in one country, not just in one continent, but in North America, Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia. And the most surprising thing is, that layer is the same age everywhere. Everything points to a single period, approximately 12,800 years ago. And when they studied what was inside that layer, that's when things started to get serious. Because what they found wasn't ordinary soil, they discovered nanodiamonds. These are tiny diamonds that don't just form under normal conditions. According to scientists, they only form when there's extreme pressure and heat. The kind of pressure that usually happens when something massive crashes into Earth at an incredible speed, like an asteroid or a comet. Aside from that, they also found platinum group elements like iridium and platinum. And the problem with this is that these metals are extremely rare on the surface of the Earth, but they are commonly found in asteroids and other objects from outer space. So for some researchers, a terrifying possibility began to form. What if there was a cosmic impact that hit the Earth in the past? And what if that impact was the cause of one of the biggest catastrophes in the history of humanity? Because if that's true, it's possible that an entire civilization was wiped out even before the history we know today began. On top of that, what was discovered in the younger Dryas boundary layer became even more alarming, because scientists didn't just find unusual sediment. Some of the materials inside it were almost 100 times more abundant compared to the normal soil around it. And that's when things started to get serious. They found what are called spherules, tiny glass-like beads that only form when rock suddenly melts due to extreme heat, then quickly hardens again while still in the air. And according to the researchers, this kind of material is usually only created in nuclear explosions. Very large impact events or in explosions that are almost equal to nuclear-level destruction. But it doesn't end there. Another surprising thing they found was a large amount of soot, or carbon-rich ash. And this wasn't just an ordinary fire. According to the analysis, the amount of soot matches massive wildfires that may have happened simultaneously in different parts of the world. It's as if entire continents were burning almost at the same time, and all of this appeared in a single geological layer. Scientists now call that layer the Younger Dryas Boundary, or YDB. And as researchers trace this layer in different parts of the Earth, they came to a terrifying realization. This could be evidence of a cosmic disaster so massive that most of the natural disasters we know in modern history would seem like minor problems in comparison. But this is where the theory becomes even more shocking, because according to some researchers, that event didn't just change the climate. They say it didn't just wipe out the giant animals of the Ice Age like mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths. It's also possible that it destroyed something even bigger, possibly an entire civilization, or at least a more advanced version of humanity, before 12,800 BCE. And this is where the so-called Younger Dryas comes in. According to this theory, a large comet entered Earth's atmosphere approximately 12,800 years ago. It is possibly connected to what is now called Comet NK, or it could be part of a much larger celestial object that broke apart as it approached Earth. Instead of just a single impact, it's possible that many fragments fell onto the planet at the same time, and the largest pieces are believed to have struck the Laurentide ice sheet. Laurentide ice sheet, a massive glacier that once covered a large part of North America. For scientists, a comet hitting the ice would cause a whole new level of catastrophe, because even if it's just a rock that hits it, that's already catastrophic. But if a 2-mile thick ice sheet gets hit, it's even worse. The ice acts like a giant amplifier. Because of the sheer force of the impact, a huge amount of water and ice instantly vaporized, and the superheated steam that formed could have circled the entire planet in just a short period of time. At the same time, millions of cubic kilometers of ice quickly melted and were pushed away. And because of that, massive walls of water formed and surged in different directions, waves that could possibly reach hundreds of feet high, like giant tsunamis that could wipe out anything in their path. There's another strange piece of evidence that geologists have debated for a long time. In Washington state, there's a place known as the Channeled Scablands. When you see it from above, it looks like a giant scraped the land with a huge knife. It's filled with deep channels and unusual patterns that can't be explained by normal erosion alone. For many decades, scientists argued about how this was formed. Eventually, a conclusion was reached. According to modern geology, it's possibly the result of massive floods. From the collapse of glacial Lake Missoula, there were massive floods that seemed almost like scenes from the Bible. But according to the younger Dryas theory, what if there wasn't just one or two floods that happened? What if almost the entire northern ice sheet was affected all at once? Because as the massive glacier melted, the water rushed toward the ocean basins. And according to geological records, sea levels rose rapidly during that time. This means that many coastal areas that had been inhabited by people for thousands of years were permanently submerged by the sea. And after the flood came the fire. According to some researchers, the atmospheric shock wave from the impacts may have caused extreme heat in the air. Some engineering principles are the same. The astronomical alignments are the same. And in many cases, the construction techniques are almost identical. Very large stone blocks, perfect angles, precise measurements. Structures that, even today, are still debated as to how they were actually built. Because even some modern engineers admit that it's hard to explain how some of these were made using only primitive tools. The same thing happened in agriculture. According to traditional history, its development should have been slow, kind of like trial and error, gradual experimentation from simple foraging to farming. But in the archaeological record, it doesn't seem like that's what happened. Because in many ancient civilizations, organized agriculture suddenly appears. Different crop species and irrigation systems are already in place, as if they knew what they were doing from the start. And it gets even stranger when you look at it from an astronomical perspective. Because to build structures that are perfectly aligned with the stars and celestial cycles, you need a very long period of observation. You can't just learn that within a single generation. It takes centuries of observing the movements of the heavens. But in the earliest layers of ancient civilizations, this kind of knowledge suddenly appears as if it's already fully developed. And for some researchers, there's a simple explanation for this. They say humanity didn't suddenly become intelligent after 10,000 BCE. It's more likely that knowledge already existed back then, and what happened was that a few survived. It's possible that those who built Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and other ancient civilizations didn't start from nothing. They might have been using remnants of much older knowledge from a world that ended during the younger Dryas catastrophe. And if you want to see a place that was possibly built by people who knew the end of their era was coming, there's one name that keeps coming up, Göbekli Tepe. It's located in southeastern Turkey, and it's one of the most mysterious archaeological discoveries in modern history. Because according to researchers, this place wasn't simply abandoned. It also wasn't just destroyed. It was deliberately buried by the very people who built it. They intentionally covered it up. It's as if they wanted to hide or protect something. And what's even more surprising is that it happened around 10,000 BCE, almost at the same time as the end of the younger Dryas. For many researchers, that's not normal behavior for a primitive society. This isn't just a simple temple that was used and then abandoned. It's more like a civilization that knew a major change was coming, and it's possible they knew the world above wasn't saved. That's why they carved their knowledge into stone, buried it underground, and they hoped that maybe someone would find it someday in the future. And after thousands of years, someone actually did. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt began excavating the site, and what he discovered completely disrupted the official timeline of human civilization. Because the oldest and deepest parts of Göbekli Tepe are also the most advanced. The very first structures are the largest, most precise, most complicated, and most advanced in astronomy. Meanwhile, the newer structures that were built later are smaller, simpler, and more crudely made. And that's the opposite of the normal development of civilization. Because over time, engineering is supposed to get better. Structures should be more advanced, not getting worse. That's why, according to some researchers, it's possible that the builders who came after didn't fully understand the original knowledge anymore. It's like they were just trying to imitate the older design that they no longer fully understood. It's like pieces of knowledge are getting lost as time goes by. The giant T-shaped pillars at Göbekli Tepe have carvings of animals, symbols, and geometric patterns. And for many decades, researchers have been trying to decode this. Some believe that there might be astronomical information hidden here, possibly star maps, comet trajectories, or records of a cosmic event. One of the most talked about pillars is the so-called vulture stone. According to some studies, it seems to show a particular sky alignment. And it's not just a simple guess. A statistical analysis was done where the carved symbols were compared to the actual positions of the stars in ancient times. And according to the results, it matches strongly with the night sky around 10,950 BCE. It's almost exactly the time when the Younger Dryas catastrophe began. For some researchers, there's a terrifying possibility here. What if they knew what happened? And what if they built all of this as a warning because they knew that most of the knowledge of their world would be lost to fire, flood, and chaos? And this is where the conversation gets even stranger, because there's a pattern that keeps appearing in almost all ancient civilizations on Earth: the flood myths. They're not just simple stories about floods, but stories about world-ending catastrophes. A great deluge that destroyed the old world and forced the survivors to start over. The ancient Sumerians have stories about Utnapishtim and Ziusudra. The Hebrews have stories about Noah. The Greeks have stories about Deucalion. The Hindus have stories about Manu. Even the Aztecs have beliefs about different ages of the world that were repeatedly destroyed by catastrophes. And in many versions of their stories, the previous world was drowned in a great flood. What's even more surprising is that this isn't only found in the Middle East or Europe. There are also similar stories among the indigenous peoples of North America, South America, Polynesia, Australia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. It's as if there's a memory that's being passed on repeatedly to different civilizations. The usual answer from mainstream academics is that this is just a coincidence. They say it's normal for people to create flood myths because floods are actually common. But for some researchers, the problem isn't that simple. Because when you study the details of these ancient flood stories more closely, there are similarities that are hard to explain as just simple coincidences. Because if you carefully read the ancient flood myths of different civilizations, you'll notice that they're not describing an ordinary flood. It's not just a river overflowing, not a storm, not seasonal flooding. What they keep describing over and over is something like the end of the world itself. It's as if the heavens opened up. There was fire falling from above. The sun darkened, the earth shook, and the sea swallowed the coastlines and entire cities. And in almost every version of the stories, there's always something that's mentioned. There was a world before the catastrophe, an older era, a golden age, a time when there was a more advanced civilization before it was completely wiped out in just a short period. In the ancient Sumerian records, there's a story about what they called the antediluvian world. That means the world before the Great Flood. According to their stories, there were kings back then who ruled for tens of thousands of years. They had vast knowledge. There was an advanced civilization. And according to their beliefs, that knowledge was directly given by the gods, who suddenly arrived and taught humanity about astronomy, engineering, agriculture, and other foundations of civilization. Meanwhile, Plato wrote about Atlantis. And according to Plato, it wasn't just a simple fantasy island. He described it as an organized and advanced civilization that suddenly sank into the sea after a massive catastrophe. And the most surprising part, according to Plato, this supposedly happened around 9,000 years before his time. And if you compute that, it almost exactly fits the timeline of the Younger Dryas. According to Plato, he got this information from the Egyptian priests. And the priests supposedly told him that civilization on Earth has been destroyed and rebuilt several times. According to them, the Greeks and other civilizations are just the latest restart of humanity. And because catastrophes kept happening in the past, the memory of older civilizations completely disappears as time goes by. It was the Egyptian priests themselves who preserved some of the older records. For many researchers, it's hard to believe that it's just a coincidence that so many cultures around the world have almost the same memory of a world-ending flood. Because oral traditions this widespread and this long-lasting don't just appear out of nowhere. Usually there's a real event behind them. As time goes by, mythology, gods, and supernatural legends are just added, because people back then didn't have scientific language to describe what they saw. But even if the details are different, they all describe the same core event: fire from the sky, widespread floods, the fall of the old world, and survivors struggling to rebuild civilization using the remaining fragments of knowledge. And for some researchers, that's an exact match to the Younger Dryas impact event. But this is where the discussion becomes more controversial, because as more discoveries come out, there is evidence that seems to contradict the official timeline of history. There are advanced structures, tools, and signs of sophisticated knowledge that are repeatedly found beneath sediment layers where they supposedly shouldn't be. One of the most famous examples of this is the Great Sphinx of Giza. When you look at the body of the Sphinx, there are clear erosion patterns that, according to some geologists, were caused by prolonged and heavy rainfall. And that's the problem. Because Egypt has been a desert for thousands of years, there hasn't been enough rainfall there to create that kind of erosion. According to the geologist Robert Schoch, the erosion on the Sphinx matches more closely with a time when the climate of North Africa was much wetter. And according to some climate studies, one of the last periods when there was this kind of heavy rainfall in the region was during the Younger Dryas period. Because after the possible cosmic impact, climate patterns temporarily changed in different parts of the Earth. According to Robert Schoch, the original construction of the Sphinx may be older than the official timeline. It could possibly date between 10,000 and 12,000 BCE. And if that's true, the Sphinx is older than the accepted history of Egyptian civilization. There's another strange discovery underwater near India. In the Gulf of Cambay, there are sonar scans that revealed what appear to be underwater structures resembling a sunken city. It can be found approximately 30 to 40 kilometers from the current coastline, and it's under almost 40 meters of water. The important detail here is that during the Younger Dryas period, Earth's sea levels were much lower. This means that area was still dry land back then. So if there are real structures there, it's possible they were built before the sea level rose, after the massive ice sheets melted. In Japan, near the Yonaguni Monument, there are massive stone formations under the sea. And according to some researchers during the Younger Dryas period, that area was still above water. In North America, there are archaeological sites found beneath flood sediments that are said to be connected to the Younger Dryas meltwater events. And what's even more surprising is that there are artifacts and signs of human activity in layers where, according to the accepted timeline, there shouldn't have been any people yet. There are tool marks on animal bones, ancient occupation sites, and evidence that seems to show humans have been in the Americas much longer than previously believed. According to some researchers, there are only two possible conclusions here. Either the official timeline of human arrival in the Americas is wrong, or there was a massive catastrophe that literally reset and buried a large part of the archaeological record. Because according to the Younger Dryas theory, it wasn't just humans that were destroyed by that event. It also buried the evidence. Meters of mud, sediment, flood debris, and impact ejecta could have covered ancient sites. So it's possible that what we now call the earliest civilization layers are not actually the very first civilization. Maybe they're just the highest parts that weren't completely buried, while the older evidence is still buried deeper underneath. For many years, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis was considered just fringe science. Many mainstream archaeologists and geologists opposed it. There were debates about dating methods, evidence, and interpretation of the data. But as time goes by, more and more supporting evidence is emerging. In 2018, there was a study in the Journal of Geology by Wolbach and other researchers who analyzed samples from 23 sites. These were from 4 continents, and they reportedly found the same thing in the YDB layer. There are platinum group anomalies, nanodiamonds, microspherules, and soot deposits that point to widespread continent-scale fires that possibly happened at the same time. And according to their conclusion, the evidence strongly supports the possibility of a cosmic impact or a giant airburst event at the beginning of the Younger Dryas period. Then, in 2019, another study was published in Scientific Reports about the Hiawatha Crater, a massive impact crater discovered in 2015 beneath the Greenland ice sheet. The exact age of this is still being debated, but one thing is clear. The crater proved that large cosmic impacts on top of giant ice sheets are possible and really do happen. This isn't just a simple theory. It has already happened before on Earth. And as research into the Younger Dryas goes deeper, more and more discoveries are being made that are hard to explain using the traditional timeline of history. In 2022, there was research from the University of South Carolina that looked at an ancient archaeological site in Syria called Abu Huraira. This is one of the earliest known farming communities in the world. And when the researchers studied the Younger Dryas boundary layer in that area, they found something unusual. There were platinum anomalies in certain materials. These were also observed at other YDB sites in different parts of the Earth. But there's another detail that's even more surprising. According to their findings, it seems the entire village was hit by an extremely hot event at the start of the Younger Dryas period. And this wasn't an ordinary fire. It wasn't a volcano either, because according to the analysis, the claystone and other construction materials at the entire site melted all at the same time. This means the temperature that hit the area was extremely high, and it happened in just a short period of time. For some researchers, it's possible that Abu Huraira was hit by one of the fragments from the Younger Dryas impact event. And if there were any survivors there, it's possible they literally saw their whole world go up in flames in just one day. But even though these kinds of findings are increasing, mainstream archaeology is still slow to change. And according to some researchers, there's a reason for this. Because for many decades, the entire academic system has been built on the current timeline of human history. There are careers, funding, institutions, textbooks, and entire scientific frameworks based on the idea that advanced civilization only began after 10,000 BCE. So if we admit that there was a more advanced civilization before the Younger Dryas, it's not just a simple addition of information. It's like you need to change the very foundation of human prehistory. And this kind of change doesn't happen quickly in science. But according to some researchers, the direction of the evidence is slowly shifting. And this is where another surprising question comes in. If there was a civilization that developed over thousands of years before 12,800 BCE, what could they have known that we don't know today? Because there are ancient texts from Sumeria, Egypt, and India that describe technologies that seem impossible for their time. And although these are often called just mythology, some parts start to seem unusual when you look at them as possible memories of an older civilization. For example, in the ancient Vedic texts of India, there are stories about what are called vimanas, flying vehicles that were said to be used for transportation and warfare. And what's unusual about this is that they are not just described as fantasy. There are details about their structure and operating principles. Of course, for most modern scholars, this is just mythology, but for some alternative researchers, what if this is just a fragment of real memory? Memories of technology that were eventually passed down through oral tradition until they became myth as thousands of years went by. Because when you lose scientific understanding of something, sometimes all that's left are symbolism and stories. There are also similar debates about some ancient Egyptian texts and carvings. One of the most controversial is the Dendera temple complex. Some researchers say that the reliefs here seem to show something that resembles electrical lighting devices. There are shapes that look like discharge tubes or arc lamps, and there are figures that seem to be surrounding an apparatus. For mainstream Egyptology, this is just symbolic religious imagery, but there are some engineers and independent researchers who believe that these might possibly mean something else. Another thing that's often mentioned is the unusual precision of ancient megalithic structures in different parts of the world. There are alignments that are almost exact down to fractions. There are stone blocks that are fitted so tightly that you can hardly fit even a thin piece of paper between them. There are enclosed chambers with acoustic properties that create specific resonance frequencies. And for some researchers, it doesn't seem like this was just simple trial and error. It looks like the result of long, accumulated scientific knowledge. Knowledge that usually requires many generations of organized learning and institutional development. So the question is, where did that kind of knowledge come from? For those who believe in the younger Dryas civilization theory, they say there's only one answer that keeps appearing in the evidence and ancient traditions. It came from the time before the catastrophe, from the survivors, from the teachers who brought the remaining knowledge after the old world fell, from the records that were hidden in stone while almost everything else was lost, and from the last people who remembered. What did the ancient world really look like? Now imagine this scenario. Not a modern global civilization like today, but an advanced civilization that gradually developed in different parts of the earth. Since around 30,000 BCE, there were settlements along the coastlines. There were agricultural centers near rivers. There were repositories of knowledge in places with enough resources to support a large population. And if you think about it, it's only natural for them to settle there, because even today, most major civilizations are formed near water. But then around 12,800 years ago, something happened that no civilization could have prepared for. Fragments of a comet possibly struck the giant North American ice sheet, and the destruction that followed was said to be almost impossible to comprehend using the normal standards of modern disasters. Giant floods, continent-scale fires, atmospheric chaos, rapid rise in sea levels, disappearance of coastlines, and regions that were once orderly and habitable suddenly became impossible to live in. And because most of their cities were likely on the coast, they were also the first to be wiped out. Because as sea levels quickly rose after the catastrophe, the sea gradually swallowed up the former coastal settlements. Places that were once dry land are now under the ocean. And if this scenario is true, almost all evidence of ancient civilization is literally still submerged under the sea to this day. The survivors, on the other hand, were scattered, traumatized, and lost connection with each other. And while they tried to survive in a new world full of chaos, they only managed to bring a few things from the previous civilization: mathematical principles, astronomical knowledge, engineering techniques, and farming methods. But they no longer had enough tools, nor a large population. There were also no organized institutions that used to preserve their knowledge, so they couldn't just continue from where they left off. They had to start all over again. And according to this theory, this is where what we call the rise of civilization began. Not as the first beginning of humanity, but as a recovery. It's possible that the survivors went to higher and more stable places, mountains, elevated plains, regions that wouldn't be easily reached by floods. And there, they tried to save the knowledge they had left before it was completely lost. They built monuments, stone structures, symbols, and astronomical alignments that would serve as memories of the old world. They established new farming communities using the seeds and techniques they were able to save. And as the last generation who remembered the old civilization slowly died out, it is said that this is possibly where writing began. Not to create literature, but to save knowledge before it was completely forgotten. And after several thousand years, Sumer, Egypt, Indus Valley, and China suddenly appear in the archaeological record. It's as if civilization suddenly sprang from nothing. But according to this theory, they didn't start from zero. They are simply continuing a recovery that began after the catastrophe. So perhaps what we call the dawn of civilization in 10,000 BCE is not really the awakening of humanity, but a remembering, a return of the remaining pieces of an older world. And if the younger Dryas impact hypothesis is correct, and if the growing scientific evidence that a cosmic catastrophe really did happen around 12,800 years ago is correct, it means that a large part of the history taught to us might be wrong. It's possible that we are not the first advanced civilization on Earth. Maybe we're only the second, or the third, or maybe we're just one in a repeating cycle of civilization and destruction that has been happening on this planet for a long time. And this is where the ancient texts about flying vehicles, crystal technologies, and global knowledge systems become even more intriguing. Because if we look at them as simple fiction, they seem impossible. But what if these are myths in the original meaning of the word? Not made-up stories, but preserved memories. Truths hidden in the form of stories so they could be passed on to the next generations after the old world was erased. And if that's the case, maybe ancient myths aren't just products of imagination. Maybe they're the remaining memories of a civilization that was swallowed by the younger Dryas catastrophe. So for some researchers, Göbekli Tepe isn't just a mystery, it's a message. It's like a warning from the survivors of a lost world. People who knew they were living at the end of an age and wanted to let future generations know that there was a civilization before them. That's why the platinum in the ground, the nanodiamonds in the sediment, and the microspherules in the ice cores are not just strange geological discoveries. It's possible that this is a timestamp, like a mark of the day when human civilization was literally reset. And perhaps the most important question in all of this is very simple. If this has happened before, what's to say it can't happen again? Because according to some astronomers, the objects that possibly hit Earth during the younger Dryas period came from a comet stream that Earth still passes through today. This means that it's possible we're still within the same cosmic path. And suddenly the ancient warnings about watching the skies become more serious. Because maybe some of them aren't just simple superstitions. Maybe they're survival warnings from people who actually witnessed what the heavens can do when humanity stops watching them. And now the question is no longer whether a catastrophe happened in the past. The real question is, are we ready if another one happens?